everybody. This is Marian Cowigowen.
And this is David Owen.
And this is You Show Me Yours, the podcast where a married couple talks about the movies and television that they loved before the first date. And today I was made to watch It Follows.
Yes, as part of the continuing Spooktacular. It Follows, of course, is the 2014 release. I saw some conflicting dates. I don't know why. I was like, I'm going with IMDb. It says 2014. Maybe it was a DVD release thing or something. I don't know. Directed by David Robert Mitchell, which is kind of like the only thing he's done. I mean, he's released a movie after this, but he had done some shorts and stuff before this, which is like super surprising as we go through this. Like the craft with which this movie is made, coming from someone who hadn't made a bunch of movies, and we'll discuss that as we go. But he wrote and directed it. It's about a movie where it follows you. It just follows you. It just walks towards you.
I like that it walks slowly.
Yeah, just
but
like
then
regular
somehow
pace.
It catches up. Even if you're in a car, you can never completely.
And we can talk about this as the movie goes. I do think one thing they don't do the best job of is really showing, like, when they drive far away and it catches up, like, it's just walking the whole time. Like, they're in places for like hours or even a day or more before it finally catches up. But they don't do the best job of sort of reiterating, because sometimes you're like, well, if that thing was just at the movie theater, how it just walks. It's it's a movie about like I said, a thing that follows you. I think the easy description of this is it's a supernatural STD.
Yeah. And or it's a morality play about casual sex. Except
or other things.
Not so much at the end, but
we'll get into that.
Yeah.
There are some other opinions on what it is. I mean, it is technically true to say it is a supernatural STD because it is sexually transmitted within the confines of the movie world. To simply say it is a sexually transmitted supernatural disease is naive. Like, of just, things have subtext, and this movie has subtext.
They do?
Yes. That staff that represents the king's penis, and it's really big.
Can we not talk about big penises?
It's Arnold Palmer size.
Yeah, I don't want to hear about anyone's penis right now. I've heard too much from politicians, but anyway.
So this movie, it's one of a handful of what I would consider modern horror classics, like staples, movies that I think will become. And I would put Sinister in there with that, despite its heavy reliance on jump scares, and other things like the Terrifier movies that have come out recently. That I think, in 10 years, those are going to be some of the movies that people are still watching in the way that we still watch the first year of the Spooktacular, the way we still watch Hellraiser, Friday the 13th. And that sort of stuff. Night of the Living Dead, which was not a spectacular movie, and even like the 30s Dracula and the 30s Frankenstein and stuff. So this is sort of the millennial / Gen Z. I guess this was hard millennial, not really Gen Z. Their turn at making their classics and sort of reinterpolating some stories and stuff. And I think this movie borrows heavy on the concept of, and of course you haven't seen this because we only watched the first Friday the 13th, but the concept that eventually the Jason of Friday the 13th just walks after you, like you don't run. Yeah. And Michael Myers is kind of the same way. He just kind of walks. He is just sort of this lumbering ghoul that's coming after you. And I think there's sort of a subtle bit of play on that idea. Because people are always like, just run, bitch, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the music in here felt very 80s to me. And so I was like, okay, there are references to 80s and classic horror, except I'm not getting them because I don't I'm not that well versed and I don't care about it that much, but I'm sure if I were, I would be very excited to see all these references.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, some of them are more veiled than others, but yeah, we'll just do a quick plot synopsis here. So Jay is a college student.
I think
we're pretty
college.
sure.
Yeah.
And she is in with a group of friends that have all been together since high school or even before. Since early childhood, they live in suburban Detroit, or just outside Detroit. And I do remember thinking the first time I watched this movie, like, man, they sure are getting a lot of B-roll of Detroit. And then they had never really said where it's set until like the final act, where they specifically reference 8 Mile and they talk about Detroit.
At one point, she stopped somewhere and it said 12 Mile Road, and I was like, okay.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
But I was trying to see the license plates to see where they were.
So one thing that this movie does not do, and you love this, is they don't just tell you a lot of information, and they don't even call out a lot of stuff that happens during the movie. In a lesser movie would be tempted to say, "Oh no, look at that," and this movie is just doesn't. It just relies on you having picked up context clues and other things.
So there's no, oh my goodness, there are so many abandoned houses here in the once great city of Detroit.
Yes, and the rest of it, the other things that we'll talk about as it goes. So these friends are Paul and Kelly, who is her sister, Annie and Yara, who are sort of interchangeable friends. Yara, I believe, is the brunette with the glasses and the clamshell thing that's always reading. And Annie is the other blonde friend that isn't. No, wait, no. Annie is the girl that dies at the beginning. I can't remember. I wrote Annie up there for some reason.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So it's Kelly, Yara, Jay, Paul is the other one in the group, right? I believe Andy is the one that dies in the beginning.
Yes, I think so.
And Jay has been seeing this mysterious guy named Hugh, and they end up consummating, at which point he knocks her out with ether. As you know, ladies, every guy keeps an ether-soaked rag in the trunk of his Oldsmobile, his 1980s Oldsmobile. Not for necessarily nefarious reasons.
To protect you, really.
But you just never know when you're going to need an ether-soaked rag, right?
Also, it's always a good sign when your first time with somebody is in the back of his car.
Oh, yeah.
That just means better things ahead.
Yeah, and one thing that's totally safe, ladies, is right after you've had sex with a guy in his car, when he gets out and goes to his trunk and starts rummaging around in his trunk while you wax poetic about, how you thought about what it would be like to date boys when you were a girl.
Yes, you should in no way be getting your clothes on and running.
No,
just lie there and let him do whatever. Totally,
it's
totally
fine.
legit.
It's fine. Perfectly fine. And after that, he straps her to a wheelchair and informs her that something is going to be following her and that she can't let it get her or it will kill her. And she doesn't really believe him at first. And then it appears. And so having had it follow you means that you can still see it, even when it is not specifically following you. So it follows you until you have sex. And then it follows the person you had sex with until they have sex or they get killed. If they get killed, it starts following you again.
It's like the presidential line of succession.
Kind of.
Except with STDs.
Kind of. Does the presidency ever fall back to the dead president? I don't think so.
Well,
but anyway,
I don't know.
And so, so she starts... the adventure ensues from there. She has to sort of come to terms with this, and eventually they end up tracking down, they being Paul, Kelly, Yara, and Greg, who is the boy across the street.
It's kind of like a Scooby Gang.
Kind of, yeah. And they end up tracking down Hugh, who's actually named Jeff, who's from like a town over or something.
Yeah, he went to great lengths to pass this on.
Well, I think you want to, you got to drive a little ways to give yourself the time, right?
And
you get the idea that Hugh or Jeff is constantly cultivating something, right? Because when in the opening scene when Annie dies, he has presumably already been engaging Jay. The timeline seems too tight for him to turn right around and do that. And in fact, he doesn't seem to know that it's following him until he points out a girl in a yellow dress in a movie theater, and Jay is like, "What girl in a yellow dress?" At which point he realizes it's passed back to him.
I didn't assume that there was any connection between Hugh and Annie. I just thought that was a way to like freak you out at the beginning and say, "What the hell is going to happen?" But that makes sense the way you explain it.
I'm 100% convinced that Hugh had passed it on to Annie, thought he was relatively rid of it, but because he's convinced that it's just easier for girls to have random sex, and it is, turns out.
Okay, if you say so.
Well, we found out if you just approach some men on a boat, that works. Yeah. Or if you just have multiple boys who you've known your whole life, they're all ready and willing.
You were, yeah.
Men are trash. Men are trash.
Services rendered.
So he seems to be smart enough to know he wants to survive this, and he seems smart enough to know that he needs to be cultivating somebody, all the time, because the hope is, you get it away from you as far as you can, but if you don't have somebody ready to go, and as a guy, it's going to take you maybe a little longer to get that relationship cultivated.
He's like one of those scam artists that has a series of girlfriends, and he's getting one of you to bankroll the next one.
Exactly. He's got wives, in different towns and stuff. I think that's how it goes. So once they find that out, they sort of, this movie never, and I'm so glad, tries to tell you what this is. It's not like they don't bump into what's his name, like
there's no gabagool.
There's no gabagool. There's no Vincent D'Onofrio to tell you, like, they don't bump into what's his name, Wes Studi.
Yeah.
Or the other guy, Graham something, the guy he was on Northern Exposure and stuff. Like the actors, these reliable Native American actors, they don't just like bump into him. They're like, oh yeah, that's for sure. That's the Wendigo, or anything like that.
No priests also.
Yeah. They don't bump to a priest, that's like, oh, let me tell you about that. That's the, whatever. That's the Irish, whatever fairy.
That's the Sheila and a gig. She's opening. I don't know. Right. Anyway, if you know a Sheila and a gig, you know where I'm going with that. But anyway,
you're gonna get a shillelagh. So there's no attempt to explain it, which I love, and which I'm sure you love, because we're on record as you loving when they don't explain stuff.
Well, the number of things that were not explained in this, like, it's a very long list.
Yes,
so honestly, I
was
just like, let's just hang on and get through the ride.
We'll do a Q&A. So they end up trying to evade it for a while. She passes it on a couple of different times, and it keeps coming back to her. And then in the end, they manage to sort of trick it or trap it. One of the things that Hugh tells her is it's not stupid, that it just walks, but it's not stupid. Like it'll break into a house. If you're in a house, it can. So at the end, they set up this elaborate Rube Goldberg thing of like, they're going to get it in a pool and electrocute it, because maybe electricity works on it for some reason. And they get it to the pool, and then it won't get in the pool initially. And finally they get it in the pool, and they manage to kill it while it's in the water. And it doesn't really say one way or another. Previously, when shot, it just kind of got right back up and kept coming. But when it's shot in the water, it seems to just sort of evaporate into blood in the water. And
a lot of blood.
Yeah. And the ending of the movie is ambiguous. Won't, leaving you to decide. But guess what? There's a sequel.
Oh, good.
So it's still going on.
Okay.
But the end of the movie is Paul, the longtime childhood friend, and Jay walking hand in hand, because they did it, to pass it on to Paul. And then Paul passed it on to prostitutes, ladies of the night, who've done nothing wrong, other than engaging in the world's oldest profession.
And prostitutes never die, so that's totally
right.
Yeah.
But honestly, as immoral as that is, it's smart because you have to assume, and like he's in the roughest part of Detroit when he does this. You have to assume that that working girl is going to be right back out there, and if you can get it, if you can get it to move, that's the key.
Here's my question. I assume that many, not all, but many prostitutes insist on wearing condoms. Does this depend on you using protection?
No one knows.
Okay.
I don't. So if it works for a woman, orgasm doesn't seem required.
No, not based on what we witnessed.
Right.
No.
So it just seems to sort of be like the act. Like it could be that the moment of insertion is when it transfers.
Okay.
That it doesn't matter. But this isn't a movie that's concerned with those sorts of details, and I love that. And it's just like whatever. What do you think? I don't know. And the very last scene is Jay and Paul walking hand in hand down the street, and in bokeh, out of focus in the background, someone is following them.
Yeah.
Is it? Up until recently, when we heard there's a sequel, no one knew. But yeah, and it may not be. I don't know how they're going to do the sequel. I think the sequel is called They Follow. So now we've got more than one.
Oh, fun!
Or
times.
is this a singular they?
Is
it now non-binary? Was it ever binary? I don't know.
Well, it had lots of gender presentations.
It did. So that's the crux of the movie. And like I said, it's easy to write this off as a supernatural STD. I think there's a lot of subtext there. But yeah, why don't we just start with what are your questions?
Am I supposed to be depressed after watching this? Because I'm kind of depressed.
So yes, if depending on your interpretation. So there is an interpretation out there that I've seen from a couple of like YouTube film critic types, like film thinkers, these guys that put up like 40-minute, 50-minute videos on movies, opining on their significance.
Okay, some people need to learn to edit themselves. Anyway,
well, the long form essay is a genre on YouTube. 2-3 hour videos, like these are. It's an essay.
Not an essay.
It's a video essay.
That's a rant. Okay. Anyway.
Well, they're usually very well produced and constructed, and they're
Okay.
There is a contingent of folk, let's just say, that think that it is loss of innocence, realization of your own mortality. That it's a transition from the bliss of youth into the realization that death is following you, and there's nothing you can do to really get away from it other than intertwine your life, even if momentarily, with the lives of others, to bring other people into your life. But inevitably, those people also die, not because of your direct action like it does in the movie, but that essentially it is a coming of age story and a realization of one's own mortality. And I think a lot of cultures consider sex to be the transition, since we've been robbed of all of our great ritualistic means of passing into adulthood. Sex is basically the last one that's left. There's no, like, you have to spend a night in the wilderness with just a spear.
Yeah, I'm okay with losing that one.
There's no, scarification rituals. There's no feet binding. There's, all of these things, some of which, yes, I'm happening to just say like the most brutal and like horrible ones, but there are plenty of, the first time that your parent takes you hunting and you kill and skin a piece of game, or, so there are all sorts of these rituals that have largely, that used to be universal, that have largely fallen to the wayside, leaving kind of sex as the only one. And so that's why they put, they're placing that, the act of sex as that realization, the loss of youth. And at the end, she is sharing it with someone, and inevitably they will both die. But that moment where they're walking down the street hand in hand, that's a respite from death. But the figure in the background is a reminder that you can never get away from death, that this life is fleeting. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I do think I think there is a lot more to it than it's just a supernatural STD. But I tend to see it more towards the loss of innocence and less towards the mortality thing. I mean, I think it's easy to sort of make the case that it's a loss of innocence.
But then, so what's her face and fuckboy number one? She says they slept together in high school. So why did this not happen then?
Well, right. I mean, the movie there's a supernatural entity within the movie, right? Like, I'm not saying like the STD thing can't be discounted completely when viewing it through this lens, right? You notice though that Jay is listless. She floats around in her pool.
Yes. Everybody in this movie is kind of.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And that's what I mean when I say, am I supposed to be depressed? Because everything, there's nothing cheerful in this whole thing.
You look at where they are. They're in, they're in these like dying suburbs of a dying city. They've lost various parents through divorce or through death. And yeah, I think she's at this point whereas when she had sex in high school, she was still in the process of, she had other things about her that were maintaining her innocence. She was still a student. She wasn't on her own. She was in the care of her mother, and father or whatever, that sort of stuff. Now she's a full-blown adult. It happening now is sort of but that's the thing, you can go as far with some of these metaphors as you want. I think the director has said there's some of that in there, the loss of innocence kind of stuff. I didn't want to do a lot of research going into this because I just wanted like a clean slate sort of thing. But for me, that's how I take it. I take it as a loss of innocence, and especially the fact that it ends with these two childhood friends who are essentially walking into the future knowing that they are going to have to continue facing this down together. That before this, he worked at an ice cream shop, and she was just drifting through college without much point in her life. And now they've both been touched by the harsh reality of this loss of innocence, this realization that life is fleeting, and yada, yada, yada. So do I think you're supposed to be depressed? Kind of, yeah. I think the whole movie is set up to kind of depress you.
Okay. Well, job well done, then.
Other questions?
Yeah, I don't. I thought until the very end, I thought it might be. I thought the it might be sort of punishment, like I said, punishment for casual sex, and then at the end, Jay and Paul, he's kind of. I mean, he knows what he's getting into. It's sort of an act of self-sacrifice, and they've had this love for each other for a while, platonic, but he wants it to be more. And then they're holding hands at the end, makes you think there's some sort of relationship, and so that's not a fully. It's not, but it's a loving relationship. It's not just, hey, we're together, let's fuck.
Whereas a Friday the 13th is, if there's a reason that it's a trope. If you have sex in a horror movie, you're gonna die. That stuff is just so much more overt, tying sex to the death. Sorry, go ahead.
Interestingly, in some languages, orgasm is translated as the little death. But we know that women don't need to have an orgasm for this to happen.
Apparently not.
But I thought it was going to be a commentary on, casual sex dooms you, but sex that's where the catalyst is love on some level will save you.
Right.
But then you see someone in the background at the end. So
and the metaphor for death, people would say, right, that's what marriage is, right? Marriage is promising yourself to someone knowing that you will die together. Whether that's by a monster that follows you and kills you by folding you in half, or whether it's the unstoppable march of time.
Mhm.
You know, you are promising to spend your life with someone and presumably experience your deaths together on some level.
Wait, hang on. Is that what we signed up for?
No. We did the B marriage license
Okay.
where it ends 5 years after our oldest child leaves the house.
Okay.
So
okay.
we're
okay.
good.
That's good. All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And the trusts are set up and everything, so the assets split equally.
Okay, that's good. It's all prearranged.
Yeah.
All right.
That's
good.
all good.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. So this, like we said, this movie is very it doesn't point. There's a great moment, and I can't do this for you. In the first Jay and Silent Bob movie, there's a moment where a villain busts in, and they're in kind of heavy makeup and stuff, but you can totally tell who it is, and it's Mark Hamill. And the movie stops, and a thing appears on screen that says, "Hey kids, it's Mark Hamill," with an arrow, pointing to him. This movie doesn't do anything approaching that.
Yeah.
And a lot of horror movies do. Oh my God, it's this thing here, and I'm describing it in detail so that you understand how it's linked to the scene before.
Yeah.
Did you ever, and some of these, it's not as easily possible to do, did you ever recognize it?
Well, one time it was dude's mother. One time it was their friend.
Yes.
But that's, I mean, at one point, Hugh says sometimes it will take the form of somebody you love.
And that's when it's his mother walking up.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Greg's mother. When it's walking up to the parking deck, it's Hugh's mother.
Oh.
Yes. And that's why he says, sometimes I think it takes the form of people you know just to fuck with you.
Ew.
And again, this is where this movie doesn't force anything on you. There is a brilliant moment when they track down Jeff Hugh, and she knocks on the door, Jay, and when the door is opened, she has a moment. She kind of freezes because the lady in front of her is the first it that she saw, the naked lady who walked up the
last time I saw deck. You had your boobs out,
right, and you were coming to try and kill me. So it's
okay.
It's Jeff's mom at one point. It is. Do you remember the naked man on the roof as they drive away before they end up at the?
Yes, with either very oddly trimmed pubic hair or like a box over his junk. Or I didn't really want to get close enough to see it, but that was some bizarre stuff.
So that was her grandfather.
Oh,
you see a picture of the grandmother and grandfather and the two sisters when they're young, early in the movie. So that's her grandfather. And the it at the pool is her dad.
Oh.
Her deceased father.
Oh.
And that's why when Kelly, her sister, asks, what does it look like?
Yeah.
She says, I don't want to say.
Yeah.
Because she would be saying, it looks like our father.
Oh. Oh, God.
Yes. And it does all sorts of stuff to psychologically torment you. Like when she sees it in the kitchen, it's peeing on the floor.
Yeah.
It's often naked.
Yeah.
In a way that, is playing with these sort of tropes of nudity being taboo and stuff. But yeah, so it is not always, but is often trying to mess with you when it breaks down the door at the boathouse. It's the tall man. We only know him as the tall man, which, and that to me is the greatest scene in this movie when they're in the bedroom. Not the boathouse, when they're in the bedroom and the one friend opens the door and the tall man just emerges from the shadows and then ducks under the door frame and stands up and he's just huge. And there's just this moment of like, oh my God. And she just nopes it out the sliding door or whatever. So the tall man kicks in the door at the boathouse and then the little pervy neighbor kid is the one that comes through the hole. Yeah. And comes after her.
I didn't recognize that face either.
Yes.
Okay.
So when you said, is there a creepy kid in this? I was actually thinking of two, because I think for the first 3/4 of this movie, Paul is pretty creepy.
Yes.
And then there's the creepy, pervy neighbor kid who's peeping on her often. Yeah, so it's the peeping Tom kid that comes through the little
is that
hole.
the kid? Oh, so I thought that was Paul.
No, that was the
Okay,
peeping Tom
that was
kid.
the kid. Okay, all right.
Unless
So
I'm wrong about that, please feel free to tell me. I always thought that was the peeping Tom
Okay,
kid.
well, it makes sense being Paul too, but
Yeah,
okay.
either way. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's how I always took it, as the peeping Tom kid. Yeah. So yeah, it is sort of devious in these different things that it does. It's, and sometimes it appears innocent, like the first time that she ever sees it independently, it's just an old woman in a nightgown.
Yeah.
Who's, just sort of walking towards her.
I gotta say, this whole thing is making perpetual virginity look pretty good, as if you in some religious orders, you're expected to be celibate your whole life.
Yeah.
It's making that look pretty good.
You can't get it if you never do it.
Nope. Also, like, what if you're gay? Can you get it?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, because the rules are yours to make up. Like, well, maybe they'll cover that in the next movie. But I
so mutual masturbation, but like I need
like,
rules here. This is why, like, Scream, fantastic.
Right.
Laid out all the rules.
Yeah. Well, and so there is one point where Jay is just trying to buy herself some time, and she goes to the beach and Lake Michigan and swims out to a boat with 3 dudes on it. If all of those dudes participated, did they all die? Did they all get it? Or did just the last one get it, and then it worked its way through the 3 of them? Like, did she kill 3 people on that boat? Who knows? Because again, this movie, and I hope that they don't make this mistake with the sequel. They almost certainly will, because sequels often do. I hope that they don't explain it. I hope that they don't go into detail about how it works. Like I said, we're going to have some sage old wise man who is going to say, "Oh yes, I know about the entity."
Detroit is actually built on an Indian burial ground, and there's an old curse. And when you let the house decay, you let the spirit out. And if you would only let
but you didn't move the bodies.
If you would only let the auto industry stay there, it would have been fine. It's actually, this is about NAFTA. NAFTA is the original STD.
Bill Clinton, and because he was such a philanderer, that's why it transfers through sex.
Right. If you hadn't bought those Japanese autos, everything would be fine.
Kept his cigar in his holster.
That
works on multiple levels. That's why I like that. I like that one.
Oh my God. From the minute we started and we're talking about Arnold Palmer, I should have just noped out of all this.
Yep.
Oh God.
So this is a question that I like. So there is one thing that I think is anachronistic in this movie. Without it, this question is much harder. What year is it in this movie?
Yeah, good question.
So Yara has a clamshell e-reader.
I don't even know. Yeah, what the hell
which is
that?
So weird. Like, there has got to
never
be
seen anything
a reason.
like that.
Because without that, there is nothing. No one has a cell phone. Every car is from the 80s. And
the first girl does when she's on the beach.
Yeah, she does. You're right. She does. She calls her mom.
But we don't know what kind of phone.
Every car is from the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Every house is old. The decor in every house is from the 80s, 70s and 80s. So apart from the cell phone at the beginning and the e-reader, those are the only 2 things that place this film in the modern day. And it would have been, I think, so amazing if they had. So number one, is there a reason for that e-reader other than she's always reading and reading stuff? Could she not just have a book? She could just have a book instead of an e-reader. She uses it as a flashlight one time. And is the cell phone thing at the very beginning necessary? Because without that, this movie would be out of time. It could have happened anywhere between 1975 and 2010.
Well,
2014.
You had assumed that Hugh was trying to give it to her, and then she died, and so it goes back on him. That could be taking place anytime afterward too.
It could be, but the fact that during our story, Yara has an e-reader, I think, places us in roughly the time of the movie's release.
Yeah.
And they went through so much trouble with all these old Fords and Oldsmobiles and
Mm-hmm.
Buicks and all of these just vintage tube televisions stacked on other floor
Mm-hmm.
model tube televisions. Like, they went through so much care to
Yeah.
make you go, when is this movie set?
Well, and I was thinking they've got this lake house, and I don't know where on the shores of the lake it is, but lakefront property anywhere these days
Yes.
is quite sought after and expensive, and this does not appear to be a wealthy family. So I'm like, is this long enough ago that this was just
Right.
you got it for cheap? And you
Yeah,
haven't had to sell it yet? I don't
And
know.
I love, this is Greg, the boy across the street. He's like, it's not nice or anything, and they get
Yeah.
there and it's pretty nice.
I would trade our house for that. That was great.
Geez. Yeah. So yeah, I did. There is, I think that is. I'm not going to say a misstep, but I would love a version of this movie that just removed those two
Mhm.
technological markers, because otherwise it's this great out of time thing that just oozes this atmosphere and this aesthetic
Mhm.
of like big chunky Detroit made automobiles
Yeah.
and tube televisions and flowery
Sofas.
Afghans on sofas.
Yeah. And those great 30s style lamps that she has in her room, like the pink and green. Those were fantastic.
Like, it's
Well-
just the production design of this movie is just impeccable.
Yeah. Well, and if it's out of time, then it could be much more related to, I mean, people our age, we hear an STD that kills you, we think of AIDS.
Right, exactly.
And also the downfall of Detroit was, I don't know when it started, but it wasn't 2014.
Right, yeah.
When the 80s, 90s.
Right.
So yeah, it makes it much more possible to link those directly or
Yeah.
more explicitly than it is
Yeah.
now.
But I also do like that with the technology in there, it makes, it's this reverse thing, because when I look at it, I look at the technology as anachronistic.
Mhm.
But if it's actually set in 2014, then everything else is anachronistic,
Yeah.
and the technology is the only thing that kind of belongs.
Well, it's similar to what you frequently say when we're watching movies that are set at a certain time.
Mhm.
The 70s didn't always look like the 70s. They
Yeah.
looked like the 60s for the first half, and
Yeah.
then the 80s looked like the 70s. And like, it takes a while for things to catch up. Like, they had boxy 70s and 80s cars until the mid to late 90s.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
that kind
Well,
of thing.
yeah, and there is an argument to be made that I've seen made that it is more about driving home the depressing state of the area,
Mhm.
that, every single person drives a car that is no less than 20 years old in this
Yeah.
movie. And when we're shown scenes that are outside of the small group neighborhood dynamic, every car we ever see is old, from the 70s,
Yeah.
80s, and like early 90s. So, you are on the one hand able to say like, hey, actually we're trying to communicate here that it's just depressing here and no one can
Mhm.
afford a new car because of the circumstances of Detroit. Like, you could make that
Yeah.
argument.
I also imagine in Detroit, you keep that Detroit-made car for as long as possible, because your neighbors will get real pissed if you come home with a Toyota.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
Maybe not now, but at a certain point, I imagine having a foreign-made car was
but
not good.
for sure. And that's one of the things that the things that I like about this movie just stack up so big.
Mhm.
Like I said, the fact that it doesn't really explain anything. The cast, by and large, it all does a great job.
Mhm.
Some of the especially the ones that aren't, part of the main cast and stuff, are great. And the atmosphere that's created by the production design is great. The cinematography is really good for me. Like, I am someone who has obsessively studied filmmaking, never participated, never made a movie, but read a lot of things and watched a lot of things. And, am constantly like, I shoot a different podcast, the Triple B, the Beer Bourbon Breakfast Podcast. Check it out on podcast providers and on YouTube. And I go into all kinds of stuff, learning about lenses, learning about, like, I get obsessed with it. It's one of the ADD things is hyperfocus. And you get obsessed with something and you dig into it so deeply. And so for so many years, I have studying film, not like academically studying movies, but studying the art of making films has been such a big part of my hobbies off and on over the years, that the language that this movie uses, and I can't remember the cinematographer's name, but he's not he's not one of the ones that comes to mind, like Dean, or like what's the guy who did Blade Runner and stuff. Why can't I remember his name? But he's done a lot of stuff, including a lot of M. Night Shyamalan stuff. And he did some other recent horror movies over the last like 10 or 15 years. And it feels like he was the perfect guy to sort of bring this director's vision onto the screen. One of the things that they do early on, which is kind of foreign, it exists a lot in indie films, but it's kind of foreign to modern horror films. And I don't know if you noticed this, but like before it is really in the picture, they do a lot of long, lingering takes. And they're often like voyeuristic in nature. In particular, I'm thinking about one where Jay is about to get in the pool and she's skimming it. And there's a shot that's like through the tree line.
Yeah, it looks
watching
like
her.
Well, you said Peeping Tom earlier.
Right.
That's
and so this could be the Peeping Tom boy, but in a movie like this, they're already establishing this overwhelming feeling of dread by having these just long shots that like probably conventional wisdom would tell you should be 3 shots. Okay, we're going to do an establishing shot of where she's at. Then we're going to cut into her scooping a leaf out of the water, and then, reverse that angle to her dumping it out. And then we go to her getting in. Like, that scene is like 30 or 45 seconds, and it is all her skimming the pool, dropping stuff out, and then getting in the water. And not until she's in the water do they cut into that scene. And then when she's in the water, there are these lingering shots of her sort of floating around. And in the trailer, they put the post-coital narration. They put that as narration over it, where she's talking about what it would be like to date a boy and these sorts of things. And she's like playing with the weeds on the ground. They put that over that sort of scene. And it's so interesting to juxtapose the way they present that in the trailer as this sort of like inner monologue that she's having as she's floating in the water, versus when it's in the movie, there is no inner monologue. She's just floating. Yeah. And you're kind of just been introduced to this character, and you don't know what to think. But you know that the language of cinema is telling you that she's our main character. Yeah. And she's going to be potentially in for the same fate as the opening girl.
That we just saw, where she's got,
and it just gives you this time to like ruminate on it. And they do that several more times during the first 30 minutes of the movie, where it's just the shot of a shot of a car. Yeah. Just 10 seconds longer than it should be.
I think the color balance contributes to that too, because everything looks really kind of bleak.
Yes.
And so it looks like fall. Yeah. Not summer. And at various points people are wearing coats or long sleeve shirts or whatever. And like, I'm watching this in North Carolina, where from like April to October, you do not put anything on your arms ever, because it's crazy hot. But you think it's fall, but then she's in the pool. And so it's very confusing. Yeah. And it just, so that contributes to that feeling of, slightly disturbed.
And then once you're in Michigan, you're like, the pool season in Michigan is like 3 weeks. Yeah. Like, they're at the beach, and even when they're at the beach, it looks like winter at the beach. Like it's dark and it's gray.
Yeah, but then the one girl is in the water, and so it's like I don't know what time of year anything is.
And that's one of the things that I love. And like I say, with the technology, one of the things I love about this movie is that it can just keep you asking, like, when is this? What month is this? Yeah. Like, she's still in school, so she's in class. She has classes. Which could happen just about any time of the year.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you're like, the other kids are there, the neighborhood kids are there to peep on her. So is it summer?
I thought at the beginning I saw when they were just like panning down the street, I thought I saw somebody with some pumpkins in front of the house, but then I didn't see that much later. So again, like it's just
and there's
nothing is set.
Yes, yeah, and I love it. But yeah, the cinematography, I think it really makes the movie by just letting those shots linger longer than conventional wisdom would tell you, doing one shot instead of 3 or 6 or 8. Modern movies today are quick cut. If two people are having a conversation, you've got coverage on both of them, and you're going back and forth, boom, boom, boom. And this movie is much more interested in long shots, establishing, not moving the camera, much more than a simple dolly kind of we're just sort of a slow sweeping movement of the camera. We're not doing quick cuts, just giving you time as an audience member to fill in the blanks, because this movie's not going to fill in a lot of those blanks. So that's one of the things that I think really elevates this movie beyond just being another scary movie or whatever. Because it's October and I've been watching scary movies, and there are some that I watch and I do a little thing on my Blue Sky where all the cool kids are, and I've been there for a while. So come on over from Twitter as Elon continues to destroy it. We got rid of Jack. He's gone. So we don't have Elon and we don't have Twitter Jack either.
Was Jack a bad guy?
Yeah, he turned out to be kind of
okay. All right.
Yeah, kind of a
I didn't think with beard like that he could be bad.
Nope,
okay.
Yeah, no, he is.
Okay.
You got to look at the haircut, which is the incel. He's got the incel haircut.
Really, we should have all just stayed with MySpace Tom.
Yeah, I know. Tom's a good guy. Tom, solid dude. But yeah, so I post a little thing, and sometimes I post these, and I'm like, there is nothing about this movie that is memorable. In fact, I sat down last night to watch a movie, and I started watching Smile, only to get 10 minutes into it and realize I watched Smile like a year ago. And it was finally just one memorable scene came up, and I was like, oh yeah, I've seen this. And then I had to think, and I was like, how does this movie resolve? And I could not remember. So I looked it up. And then once I looked it up, I was like, oh yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah.
That's some of these, and that was even one of my comments. I watched this movie called Tarot, and it was slickly produced and overdone and overproduced, I think is what I said. And my comment was, I'm confident that I won't remember a thing about this movie tomorrow. But as of this moment, I would say, sure. If you're looking for a 6 out of 10 horror movie that isn't gonna, it's not gonna change the world, go for it. And this movie could be that. It could easily have been that.
Yeah.
And maybe it is for you. I don't know.
Yes.
But for me, all of these things, right? The cinematography, the acting, the not caring about explaining the leaving so much of that up to interpretation, the look of it, the music, which we'll talk about in a minute. All of that stuff is what comes together to put this in that 8 to 10 star sort of range for me, and to put it on my short list of the modern classics, the movies that again I think 15 years from now people are going to still be saying oh, you got to watch that, the way they say, oh, you got to watch John Carpenter's The Thing, you got to watch that, you got to watch Hellraiser, but yeah, I think let's do the music, and then let's wrap it up, because the music, I think, is one of those things for me that just drives us over the the edge. There's several different things that put it over the edge, but for me, the music in this is just.
When we were watching it, I was hearing the music and going, oh yeah, this is totally his jam.
Yeah, so we'll do something from the title sequence here, or the piece that is called Title. All right, here we go. Ready? So the funny thing about this music is that I remember seeing really early on. So this is the artist is named Disaster Piece, is the name of the artist, and he makes video game music. And he's done it for a while. There's several games. Fez is a game you might know if you played video games, where he did the music. And this is so like just in his style, but darker. Normally his style's a little more ethereal and a little less oppressively dark the way that this is. And I remember hearing, his real name is Rich Vreeland, I think. I remember, but I used to do video game podcasts and stuff once upon a time. And one of the things we did is we interviewed a guy named Ian Stalker who made a few games, one called Escape Goat. And we were interviewing him. And one of the things I brought up was so Ian is one of these guys who makes video games, but he makes like every aspect. He does the art, he does the music, he does the coding. And bringing up the design, the similarity between the way that they design a soundtrack. And he was like, "Oh yeah, no, I used to live down the street from Rich," and yada. And I was like, "That totally makes sense." And the stuff that Ian did was always a little bit darker, and so this stuff really reminded me of Ian's darker stuff. So it's this, for me in my head, which this doesn't mean anything to anybody but me, it was this like full circle thing where I was interviewing Ian Stalker 10 years ago saying, your music kind of reminds me of Disaster Piece. And then I'm watching this movie going, this really reminds me of Ian Stalker. So kind of a full circle thing for me. But yeah, that music, the way, the synth heavy, the way that it's just, like it's setting a mood. It's making you uneasy. Like he's choosing these bass notes that don't quite feel right. Like when I produce this podcast, because I have a lot of bass in my voice, like when I look at the dials here, I have the low end rolled off for me because bass can be an uncomfortable thing to listen to. There are a lot of these YouTube guys and podcast guys, they want to appear to have a deep voice that they don't really have. So they pump that bass, all the way up like this. This is probably a familiar sound if you listen to podcasts, because a lot of men, their voice sound like this not because they're deep, but because they pump the bass all the way up.
That doesn't sound deep. It just sounds loud. It
sounds loud, but it also, like, in good headphones, there's a timbre to it that just sounds bassy.
It doesn't sound like Barry White to me.
Right. No, it's not supposed to sound like Barry White, but it's not supposed to sound like their regular voice that sounds more like that, So I roll the bass off because it's, when I edit this podcast or the other podcasts that I produce, I actually go in and there are certain frequencies that I roll off because they're unpleasant to the ear. And in this soundtrack, he's embracing those frequencies because they are unpleasant to hear.
Yeah. Well, I thought a couple things that I would not have noticed if not for you painstakingly explaining some of this stuff to me over the last couple of Spooktaculars and various other things. It sounds very 80s.
Yes.
With the synth, which contributes to that timeless or out of time feeling. And similar to some of the 80s horror movies that we watched. So there's that feeling. And it reminded me a lot of Mandy.
Yeah, which is going for a lot of the same notes that this movie's going for as far as aesthetics. Yeah. No, that's lovely observations.
I am listening, even if I have a pained look on my face.
Yes, Mandy, the movie that was so unpleasant to you.
Yep.
You've written academic papers about it.
I wouldn't say, not an academic paper. I wrote about it for a class.
That's an academic paper.
No.
It's not like you didn't submit it to a journal for peer review or anything.
Right.
Because you'd be laughed out of the journal.
I'm gonna submit it to the journal of movies that suck and we really hate our husbands for them.
Yes.
.com.
Yeah, but Mandy is going the next step. It's taking those visuals as well, the bright colors and the distortions and stuff, and so it's taking the next step that this movie could have taken, and I think if this movie had taken it would have been too much.
I'm glad it did not. I'm
Yeah.
glad to have as few similarities to Mandy as possible. So now the question is the sequel to this going to go on full?
Will it be more like
a
Mandy?
Full Mandy. So, unsurprisingly, I have a West Wing connection to this.
Oh yeah.
So you've watched enough with me. You know that in the first season, there's this character named Mandy who a lot of people hate. I didn't hate, but whatever. And then she just disappears.
Sure.
She's just not there for the second season, and there's no explanation of, oh, Mandy went off to, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So fans of the show, when they talk about it, they say, oh, Mandy went to Mandyville.
Okay.
That's where she went. And so whenever there's any character in anything that just disappears, they went to Mandyville.
Nice.
So now we have a second meaning. Is the sequel to this gonna go to Mandyville? Meaning go over the top in a way that I find very unpleasant.
Yes. I hold out little hope for the sequel.
Okay.
Because I do think they are going. It's as someone who is nominally creative, I have been guilty of this.
Mm-hmm.
Making something, a piece of art or whatever, and not understanding what people liked about it,
Mm-hmm.
but thinking you do.
Yeah.
As the auteur, believing that you understood what they liked about it.
Mm-hmm.
I've done several creative endeavors over time that have involved other people, and involved people reading my work on the internet and viewing my work on the internet. And I always fear with this sort of stuff that people don't understand, because I feel like the version of David Robert Mitchell that made this movie in 2014 potentially felt like he had capped it out nicely. And I do wonder if his follow-up to this, which was, I don't think related to, horror, had been more successful. Maybe he wouldn't be back at this well. I don't know. I don't know if his follow-up movie was successful or not. I now know through IMDb that it exists, so I'm going to try to watch it. And I don't have IMDb up, so I don't remember what it's called. So yeah, I hope that he understands what it is that people liked about his movie, and I hope that he makes a version of it that people will enjoy, with the acknowledgement that he's not making this movie for me. So the choices he makes may not be the choices I would make. And there is a certain amount of explaining the entity. I believe they call it the entity, in the extended canon or whatever, that it could work. There is some limited explanation, what have we found? If there's a moment where they're like, what do we know about it? And they're just sort of breaking it down and making some rules. Like it can break into your house. It didn't like water. It seemed in water. It seemed to die and be gone for potentially an extended time. Who knows? Is there some connection to water? Is there, like the worst possible thing would be like even though The Ring ends with like a twist ending, would be like, the whole entire movie of The Ring is about them figuring out Samara and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then at the end, guess what? She wasn't innocent after all. She was evil. And that's why they drown her and all that stuff.
We found a book that lists all the rules about
that. Yeah, there's a Cherokee legend of, So remains to be seen. I think that comes out later this year or next year. Year.
I don't think I want to watch it, but tell me about it.
I'll tell you all about it. No. I think that's it. I'm sure there are more things I could yap about, but we've talked about It Follows long enough. So highly recommended from me.
Meh from me.
Meh
but,
from
if you've heard about it and you're like, what is it? It can't just watch it. It's,
Was it scary at all?
No.
Was there were a couple jump scares?
There were jump scares, and it was depressing.
Was it? Yeah. Was there any tension in it for you?
I mean, sure.
Okay.
I don't want people to die in that crunched up, folded in half kind of way.
Sure.
So, but definitely not going to go out and have random casual sex with a guy in the back of his Bel Air or whatever car that was, which I'm sure you're relieved about for many reasons.
Yeah, sure.
I thought you might be. Yeah. Well, folks, we would love to know what you think of It Follows. Are you more with Dave, more with me? whatever, let us know what you think. You can reach us in a couple different ways. You can find us on Facebook, or you can send us an email. Our handle's the same for both. It's YSMY Podcast, YSMY for You Show Me Yours. We're at gmail.com, or DM us on Facebook. And also on Facebook, you can find links to our latest episodes. We typically have new episodes every other Wednesday. So 2 weeks from today, no matter when you're listening, there'll be a new episode. But in the month of October, we have episodes every single week for Spooktacular. And in 2024, that means we have 5 episodes. And our 5th Spooktacular episode for 2024 is coming up next time. And what are we watching next time, Dave, to close it out?
We're going to close it out with The Babadook.
Oh, okay. I've heard about this. I've heard little bits and pieces, but never seen it.
Yeah, I think it is a rare female-helmed horror movie that is dealing with, I think, very female-centric issues, and I think it does it in a good way, and I think it's got good tension in it.
Okay.
So, will it scare you? I don't know, but I think you will enjoy having watched it.
Okay, good. All right. Well, and if nothing else, I get to check things off my list. So,
yes.
I'll put it on my bucket list.
Yeah.
Or something. Okay. Anyway, we will see you next time with The Babadook, not to be confused with The Gabagool. I'm sorry. That's just funny to me now. I have to keep mentioning it.
The Gabagool.
Yes. In the meantime, this has been You Show Me Yours. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye. We talked so long that my music ran out. I just have this. I was going to remember that one time. What was the episode where we hit that moment in the music where it swelled? I can't remember.
I don't remember.
But yeah, I ran out.
No one else does either.
I ran out of music. So this is the end of the episode. Just me complaining about running out of music.
That happens sometimes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.